And welcome to this week's episode of the UFO Show, brought to you by Bet99.com. Today we are joined by a very special guest, Chris Golden of the Ready Set Pwn podcast. So Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Adam and Andy.
Okay, so we're going to do something a little bit different today. We've never talked about esports, and obviously your show does focus on the esports world. So for those of us who maybe aren't fully in the esports world or know what's going on, can you give us kind of like a brief description of what the esports world is kind of like?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, esports is, simply put, competitive video games, which I think when we attach the word sport to it is what gets most of the guffaws. But it's essentially, top performing competitors like any other sort of competitive sport would be like. Yes, they play with a console or on a computer, but it is the top tier. And like anyone, we could aspire to be sports professionals, but more often than not, the majority of us will simply be, the ones who play at home. I mean, it's like playing hockey on the street, playing pickup ball down at the local park. As far as the esport that I'm more focused on, it's the Overwatch League, which is based on the game Overwatch, and it is an international league with a different approach to how esports is managed. In many leagues, it's built on the guild system or club system. So if we think about the context of local sports leagues, usually it's a club association. It's not necessarily a regional team. Well, esports is very much like that. The Overwatch League chose to go the more traditional sports route, teams based in cities. So the Vancouver Titans and the Toronto Defiant, the two Canadian Overwatch League franchises, those are the two that Ready Set Pwn is more focused on.
And before we get into the bets, these esports players, if you get up into the big leagues, you're making big coin, correct?
Oh, yes. Like in the Overwatch League, the minimum salary, I want to say, is $50,000 US. I can't imagine there are actually that many players who are making the minimum salary. Now, the league itself has been going through some challenges like any professional league has with the pandemic. But they're a little bit better insulated, being that there isn't a necessity to have people congregate in a space. You can do this online. But some of the top players, they're making quite easily, six figures, and we're talking into the 200,000 or 300,000. And that's just to play. If you start to take into consideration sponsorship activation they might be able to be part of, or their actual streaming presence where they can go in and make even more money, it's not small potatoes.
So before we jump into the bets here, Chris, I'm just wondering, you're saying these players make $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 sometimes. How does the league generate money? Is it people paying to watch on Twitch? Is it sponsorships? Do they sell tickets to big tournaments? Can you maybe touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is all of the above. The esports sort of ecosystem currently is funded through sponsorships. Marketing departments want to spend money because that is where the vast number of young eyes are currently focused. If we think about the context of big professional sports, the big ticket item is TV revenue. I mean, you look at the National Football League. They have generated Sunday as a day for football, and it is the sanctum to which networks fight tooth or nail to spend money to have on their particular channel. Well, esports doesn't necessarily go through the traditional mechanism. It is going through platforms like Twitch, YouTube, and the like. And the younger generation isn't watching NBC to see an NFL team necessarily. They're actually on Twitch or YouTube watching gaming content creators, streamers. And as a result, if you want that younger audience, it's a lot more accessible for you to spend money there to make that happen. So when you think about the context of the Overwatch League, sponsors are ponying up some big coin, not only at the league level, but also at the team level, just to get their brands recognized. And it's that money that's funding. Now, are there ticketed events? There sure are. The Dota is one that has large scale events. In fact, the one that was held here in Vancouver, the International, sold out Rogers Arena for an entire weekend. We're talking Thursday through Sunday. The bowl, upper bowl, lower bowl, and floor was packed. And again, when we think about in the context of the Vancouver Canucks, I think they would love to have that many people paying tickets all day long, 4 days straight. And again, it's the context of how big esports happens to be.
Okay, so why don't we jump into some of the betting here? Once again, we do have a code. If you head over to the area51sportsnetwork.com/betting, you get $600 back off your initial deposit. So up to $600 if you put in, you get an additional whatever you put into there to bet. And once again, that's area51sportsnetwork.com/betting here on bet99.com. So why don't we jump into a little bit of the bets? And we'll start off with a game that is going to, I think it happens tomorrow. It looks like tomorrow. The Vancouver Titans versus the San Francisco Shock. Vancouver's plus 900 and San Francisco's minus 3,305. So I'm guessing that San Francisco's the better team there?
On paper, and despite San Francisco's current downtrend, probably still a better team. The Vancouver Titans have had a rough season and a half. Their first or inaugural season was actually just over 2 years ago, and they were a top-tier team, very competitive, and probably the favorite in every match that they played, save for those matches against the San Francisco Shock. Unfortunately, the team went through some restructuring midway through last season, and the group that's together, while they try their best, unfortunately, have only just acquired their first win of the season last week. Going against a team like the San Francisco Shock is a hard ask. I mean, if we were thinking of the possibility of an upset for this week's play, this is not the match to potentially go and presume you're going to get good money on. Now, betting for the Vancouver Titans to win, anything is possible, but they just don't compare. It is a top tier team, maybe on the downswing, and a bottom tier team that's fighting for respect at this point.
And I remember reading about that, how the Vancouver Titans went through like a huge player. They let go like their best players just out of the blue kind of last year or the year before.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, when the Titans first entered the league, they acquired essentially a team that was playing in a lower level or low division and brought them into the league. And that team, with the synergy they had, performed extremely well. Going into their second season, so last year, they had made a few changes. They had actually released a very popular player, and when they built their brand around, replaced them with someone else who had had some history of maybe unsettled times in the league. And whether that had anything to do with it or it was simply a matter of the pandemic getting in the way of their success, they made the critical decision to cut their entire team with only four games under their belt, and then proceed, after all other teams have acquired top talent, to populate with, frankly, what was left over. That team that they put together last year was probably more competitive than the team that's currently being fielded this season. And it's not to suggest that the Titans did not improve. They brought in some tried and true talent with the acquisition of Linkser and Fire, and a player by the name of Friedwiener, which in the world of traditional sports is kind of XFL-ish with He Hate Me. But the rest of the league simply accelerated their own level of improvement. And now the Vancouver Titans are not worst because they won one match last weekend.
They kind of sound like the Buffalo Sabres of the league.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
was gonna say.
it's a good analogy to compare them to. Although, at least with the Sabres, they have the opportunity through the draft to possibly improve themselves. The Vancouver Titans, there's no draft. It's all, privately held contracts, and at the end of the day, players have a lot of say as to whether or not they want to play for a team who, honestly, unfortunately, does not have the best reputation within the league.
And then on Saturday they play again, and you called it the Bread Bowl versus the
Yes.
London Spitfire. Now that one is very close. It's minus 129 for Vancouver and minus 104 for London. So what can you tell us about that match?
So these are the two bottom table teams. The London Spitfire are currently winless through the season. The Vancouver Titans, having that one win last weekend, got themselves a little bit of a head start. The reason it was called the Bread Bowl is in the vernacular of the Overwatch League, the matchup between the worst teams gets nicknamed the Toilet Bowl. But the Vancouver Titans had a hell of a sponsorship activation this season with Pizza Hut, where breadsticks would be awarded if the team were to perform certain tasks over the course of a match. And it just became essentially the meme that everyone rallied behind. So the team's no good, it can't win, but boy, oh boy, if they can award breadsticks, it'll be awesome. So the Toilet Bowl became the Bread Bowl.
That sounds like a very video game sponsorship. That or Mountain Dew or something like that.
Well, and that's, yeah, I mean, you think of the Pizza Hut sponsorship with breadsticks, allegedly, and I mean, I can't say that there's any truth to this or not. When the Vancouver Titans last weekend managed to acquire breadsticks, the code that was given out broke Pizza Hut's website. And it does not yet work because apparently hungry, rabid gamers needed themselves some carbs.
Wow.
That's hilarious.
Okay, so moving on from that, we'll focus on the other team that Ready Set Pwn looks at, the Toronto Defiant.
Mm-hmm.
Now they play the San Francisco Shock. This is a little bit closer. It's Toronto plus 215 and San Francisco minus 301. So do you think Toronto can pull off the upset here?
I can. In fact, in our episode this week, myself and my co-host, Ani, we had believed if there was an upset to be had, this is it. Now, the Toronto Defiant are going to be hard-pressed to upset the San Francisco Shock. I mean, ultimately, until such time as the Shock prove otherwise, they are a top-table team, whereas Toronto is what we would call the gatekeeper. They're not horrible. They're just, unfortunately, the type of team that you were to go and define yourself as if you beat them, you're top tier. And if you lose to them, you're bottom tier, sort of middle of the pack. Toronto's been performing well as of late. They've sort of found a rhythm within the season. And if they wish to go and make a serious run, beating the San Francisco Shock is a good way to do it. That will be both teams. Not both teams, but the Toronto Defiant's last match of the regular season going into the stage playoffs. So they obviously have something to play for. They also have the opportunity to go 4-0 on the stage, which sets them up themselves well for a stage playoff visit to Hawaii, which is kind of like the carrot that's being dangled in front of these teams based in North America to play teams that are based out of Korea and China.
And what other matches this week? And do you have your eye on?
Well, obviously, the Vancouver Titans taking on the San Francisco Shock, as we had sort of talked to earlier, was one that we're going to be watching simply for the fact to see if Vancouver can actually hold their own. They performed very well against San Francisco, actually, in their last matchup. But the league itself is kind of in a weird sort of place. So the Overwatch League is divided into 4 stages. Each stage has a playoff, and then there's a regular season record that then feeds to their actual playoff experience. As it stands, there are 3 teams that will be on the outside looking in. Those teams are currently the Vancouver Titans, the London Spitfire, and likely the Florida Mayhem. Now, why the Florida Mayhem might still have a chance is that teams above them performed poorly and are currently on a bye week. So if there is a match of interest, it's the Los Angeles Gladiators and the Florida Mayhem, that taking place tomorrow.
So right now, Florida Mayhem are plus 255, and the Los Angeles Gladiators are minus 367. So is that maybe a match that you take Florida because it's kind of like a last stand? You know, anything can happen?
Exactly. Like Florida could very well be playing for their playoff lives. And being that they have a lot to play for, whereas Los Angeles is comfortably in the playoffs, may want to position themselves to try off different strategies to go into the postseason. They may maybe take their foot off the gas, or use the vernacular of gaming, sandbag a little. So I think there is the possibility that Florida could pull off a win and make a few bucks.
That's a very interesting point you made there, Chris. It's kind of one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, like when I look at it, like say an NHL game, right? I factor in things like, if a team's playing 3 and 4 on the road with travel. So I know you mentioned, if you're in the playoffs, maybe you try out some new strategies. The game's not important. Are you able to maybe mention sort of what are the kind of things you look for outside of the actual physical gameplay when you make your bets? Like, is there certain things that we can look for to try to, give us a competitive edge when betting?
Yeah, it's, much like traditional sports, what you had sort of talked about are things you pay attention to. Within the esports context, there's the concept of meta. What is meta? Now, different games have, different structures, but to use, let's say, an NHL example, the I don't know, neutral zone trap would be a version of meta, or a left wing lock, the more modern version of the trap. It's essentially a system that's put in place and how you sort of play that defines which team sort of does better over another. So, we'll go back into the trap era. Why did New Jersey succeed? Well, they were really good at the trap. They weren't necessarily the best team, but you had to take that into consideration. So with esports, that's one of the things that really have to come into play. They could have the most talented roster available, but if they're not good at the strategy that is currently most successful, that is a significant discount on their ability. The Overwatch League is unique in that they actually shift metas throughout the season for 2 different reasons. One, they went through a period of time in which the meta was stagnant. It was like the neutral zone trap, and everyone had to play it. Not everyone was good at it, and it wasn't good entertainment from a broadcast perspective. So they went and started restricting how different characters could be picked. And they now have what's called a hero lock, or hero pools is what they call it. And that would be akin to the NHL, every few months deciding that they're going to go and prevent a particular position being played. So this month, there's no left winger. Next month, no goalkeeper. Obviously, that type of shift drastically alters how a team performs. And it's one of the reasons why we see a lot of these shifts in place. So when I start to consider the teams, it's understanding what is the current meta, who has the best sort of position players that can accommodate the characters that are currently available, and then evaluating how that might impact their opponent. The Vancouver Titans beating the Boston Uprising last week is a perfect example of a much better team losing to a weaker team because the meta was not conducive to their play. In Vancouver, it was as if they were gifted an opportunity to make it work.
So once again, you can find all of the bets over at bet99.com. Head down to area51sportsnetwork.com/betting to use the code to get $600 back on your initial deposit. So let's do a quick transition here, and we're going to jump into the CFL, which is one of your other sports that you do follow. And we got a big game. Now, I know Andy is not the biggest fan of the CFL, so he can jump in if he wants. But we got a big game today. The BC Lions versus the Calgary Stampeders. Now, BC, we don't know if it's going to be Mike Riley or Nathan Rourke. Right now, it's assuming it's Nathan Rourke, the kid from Victoria. So we got plus 225 for the Lions, minus 334 for the Stampeders. Now, both of them are coming off a loss. So what are you thinking tonight?
Well, I got some bias here. I'm feeling the Lions, but the question mark here is sort of Nathan Rourke's performance. And we consider how he performed against the Saskatchewan Roughriders. He got thrown into the fire. I mean, of all stadiums to get your first professional start in, Regina has to be the worst or best, depending on your perspective. He did find his groove, and the Lions started to rally around him, but we also have to take into consideration the moment Nathan Rourke found his play, suddenly Mike Riley's coming back into the game, having been the declared starter only to have been pulled out at essentially warm-up. There are so many question marks about the health of Riley. I think Nathan Rourke is the starter here. And based on that alone, while I'm still big on the Lions, I feel that definitively gives the edge to the Calgary Stampeders, who are not only, the veteran team, but one who also has something to prove. So the intangible goes their way.
It's
Yeah,
interesting. Oh, go ahead,
sorry, go
Andy.
ahead, Adam. I was just gonna say, I agree. That's actually a pretty good breakdown. Like, on the one hand, you think Nathan Rourke, rookie quarterback, probably advantage Calgary, but at the same time, how can we really judge his performance last week when, he finds out 7 seconds before the game starts, literally after the coin toss, by the way, you're playing, by the way, it's on the road, by the way, it's in Saskatchewan, right? So, yeah, I mean, it talk about a tough situation, right? I think, if you are feeling lucky, I think the Lions have a puncher's chance, and you can maybe play the odds and try to win some money. But if you're looking for a pure who's going to win, I would take Calgary in this one.
And it does create an interesting debate around the world of betting, this Mike Riley situation, because I remember after it happened, there were a lot of people who were calling out the BC Lions for not giving out the right starter, which affected the odds. But when you have a quarterback who you're told, hey, the quarterback's going to play, and then like a couple of minutes before kickoff, the quarterback says, no, I'm not 100%. What can the Lions do in that case? They can't go back in time and say, by the way, Mike Riley's not playing today. So it is an interesting perspective in that injuries do happen last minute, and they do happen to quarterbacks, and it does change the odds significantly. Because if you had money on the Lions, thinking, oh, Mike Riley's going to light up the Rough Riders, and then all of a sudden Nathan Rourke comes in, you feel a little bit cheated.
Well, I mean, on that note, I mean, the BC Lions, obviously, to your point, at the toss, find out Riley's not playing. During halftime in his interview, Rick Campbell's like, no, Riley's out. He informed us he's hurt. We thought he could go, couldn't make it work. And who comes trotting out to take the snap for the Lions to start the second half? It's Mike Riley. An interesting situation when the head coach is telling you one thing completely different than ultimately what reality will be. And I mean, it sort of begs the question. You obviously go with your trusted veteran of Mike Riley. If he says he's ready to go, he's ready to go. And if he's not, he's not. But at some point in time, I have to question who's actually coaching or running the show. Is it the head coach and Rick Campbell, or is it Mike Riley, the quarterback? And if he wasn't good enough for the first half, what suddenly made him better for the second?
Well, one thing that I would suggest that people do is go check out Farhan Lalji's tweets on this, because he even talks about how Rick Campbell was kind of standing there, and then Mike Riley just came out of nowhere and was like, yeah, I'm good now. So, you're paying this guy. He's one of the top paid players in the league. You're going to tell him, that he's not playing right now? Like, no, that's not going to happen. But it does create an interesting conversation. It's the same in the NFL. Like, if your starter is out and then halfway through the game, something happens, they get massage treatment and they feel good to go, are you going to tell a guy like Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady or Lamar Jackson, no, you're going to sit the rest of the half because you said you were injured, but now you're fine? Like, it's an interesting dynamic, and it shows that the quarterback position is so important that they're willing to risk kind of an injury in week one just to get a win.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think that's it. It's week one. If it was later in the season, I'm maybe more likely to roll with Riley, but I'd have to consider if it's bad enough that it keeps him out of the first half at the start of the game where he decides I can't go. The magic of whatever happened at halftime to make him ready, if it had to do with the score in the game, because at that point the Rough Riders were handily ahead. I mean, the Lions made a heck of a run, and had it not been for arguably a couple of missed field goals, the Lions actually take the win. So I just feel that if you think about your success as an organization, as head coach, you maybe say, no, Mike, let's make sure you're good. We'll get you going in Calgary. Whereas now, why is it still a question mark? Well, there's something bigger at play. And I think the health of your franchise quarterback is more important. It would be no different with Patrick Mahomes and KC. The first game of the season, nah, man, we need you for the long run. We want you to be available when we're playing again in January and February in the Super Bowl.
Maybe he went into the locker room and got that special spray that the football and soccer players use, where they're lying on the ground like they've been shot, and then the special spray comes out, and then all of a sudden they're running around like nothing happened.
Yeah, magic spray. I need some of that magic spray.
Yeah, me too, right?
Okay, and then we'll throw out one last question here before we wrap up. The odds to win the Grey Cup this year. So they are out. Right now, the Hamilton Tiger Cats have a plus 350. Saskatchewan Roughriders are at plus 400, and Winnipeg rounds out the top three at plus 460. The Lions are in last place at plus 1,100. So who are you taking to win the Grey Cup this year?
Oh man, so the CFL, I love the league, I love the game, I love the Lions, I truly do. But the fact so many teams can make a run in November, it is so hard to really. I mean, I think about the Lions for me. That pick is enticing because I actually think the Lions have the potential to pull things together and get hot at the right time. You're never truly out of the playoffs in the CFL. I mean, again, there are only so many teams, and more than half of them make the postseason. So, but as to who's the favorite, I would have to go actually with the Rough Riders. They're a good team. Obviously, Saskatchewan always ensures that they're competitive. But yeah, I'm going to put money on the Lions. I'm biased, and I want to make a buck.
And yeah, we've seen it. You know, the Lions, when they won their Grey Cup, where they 1-6 to start the year, and they go all the way and win the championship. So these type of runs happen. We see 4-win teams make the playoffs in the CFL, 4 or 5-win teams, and then they go on long, deep runs.
Yeah, exactly.
It's unlike any other league.
The thing the Lions have going for them too, right, is you think, I mean, they probably don't have the best quarterback, but they probably have, second, maybe the third best quarterback in the league, right? So much of Chris's point, like, if you look at it strictly from an odds perspective, you make the playoffs with, say, 6 wins, you really only need 2-3 good games from the rest of your team. And, Mike Riley to play like the franchise player he is. And there you go. There's your championship, right? So, yeah, I mean, I like those odds. What you said there, you said plus 1,200 for the Lions to win. I throw money on that. I also really like what Toronto has done. I know they have, zero relevance in the CFL market in Toronto, but I think their odds are pretty good too. Those are the 2 teams I'd be looking at.
Yeah, it will be an interesting season, and what makes it even more complicated betting-wise is we didn't have a season last year, so we can't really say, you can say Bo Levi Mitchell is coming off a great season in 2019. You can't say, like, these players have aged in an entire 2 years, essentially, since they've stepped on the field. So there are players that, even the Lions signed who never played a game for the Lions and are now on different teams. So it will be interesting. I think we're gonna see some high scoring games, especially early in the season, because the defenses are just trying to figure out what's going on. We saw that this weekend. There's going to be a lot of tight games, and it's going to be exciting for sure. The CFL is back, and that's always a good thing.
Agreed.
Okay, well, thank you very much to Chris for joining us this week. Chris, do you want to throw out all of your socials, all of your shows and everything before we wrap up here?
Yeah, certainly. So if you're looking for more information on the esports podcast, Ready Set Pwn, you can go to readysetpwn.com. We are in every podcast application out there. As we said, I cover the Vancouver Titans and Toronto Defiant, but also talk a little bit about the rest of the Overwatch League and the game itself. I also have a Canucks focused podcast, C4 Canucks Hockey Podcast, which is the best mediocre and longest running Canucks podcast in the market. We have some good fun each and every week. And if you're looking for that show, it's c4podcast.com, and myself on social media, I am Lightforce. That's Lyteforce, and I am pretty much Lightforce everywhere.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris. Once again, we will be back next week. For Andy, I'm Adam, and thank you for listening to this week's episode of the UFO Show.
Thanks, Chris.